Hey folks, and welcome back to Lonely Whore Guitars. Today we've got a bit of a conundrum. My usual neck blanks are like this. Once I've processed them out of the raw lumber here, we've got generally fairly straight grain. It's about 3 inches wide and, well, it's straight. So all of my jigs and the way I glue things up and do cross cuts and so forth, kind of assume I've got a nice straight edge to work with. So here is one of the ones that I've actually done the scarf joint cut on so far. And it'll get glued up something like this. And when I was cutting it, it was nice and flat like this. So I could cut, we flip the headstock, and we glue like this. And then ultimately we also cut to length. All this kind of assumes I've got a nice straight edge to work with. Well, it's time to work on this koa neck. And we got a couple things going on. One, it's not straight. It's not our 3 inches that I'm used to working with. I do work with sometimes narrower material if I'm going to put wings on the headstock, but 3 inches gives me enough size for the headstock of my acoustics, which are like 2 7/8. So this kind of goes off at a little bit of an angle and then really changes here. It is all quarter sawn. This edge is kind of straight with the grain. This edge is not. We don't have the full width to deal with. So we're going to do this in a little bit different fashion than what I normally do. So I'm going to do this in 2 pieces. I usually try and cut it in one, and then when I flip, the grain doesn't match exactly, but it's the same style of grain. This, because this curves off so much, if I were to just do like a nice straight cut along here, then my headstock is going to have curved wood. So what I'm going to do is cut this in 2 chunks. I'm going to do this kind of straight, and then do this kind of straight with the grain, and put it all together. But how do I make my cuts? Well, this is where we're going to sister up some MDF on it. So we're going to draw a center line along here and a center line on some MDF, and then that's going to be our new edge for making our cuts. A little double stick tape, and we should be able to bring this all together. It's just going to be a little sketchier than what I normally do. So on these kinds of things, what I try and do is find some grain that is very obvious. And here, to sort of the center line I want to use at this end, because this is where we are at our widest. I kind of want to center out on that. The bottom of this sort of darker streak is about 1 1/8 inches. So if we go 1 1/8 inches off of that, that puts our center line up here. And then if we run our MDF from there, this is going to be about what our cutout version looks like. So we just do a little double check to make sure that we aren't going to cut off anything, and that looks like that will do just nicely. So we'll go ahead and tape this on. And then use it as an outline to get rid of anything that sort of exceeds the lines. You know, get rid of this extra chunk here. We'll go ahead and cut that there. Square up the ends on the router table, just like we were doing any other kind of MDF template work. And this is my scarf joint jig. If I line up here based on, you know, the number I need to give me the length I need, fret side out. So if I'm making decisions about, you know, what part of the neck is most aesthetically pleasing, I can flip it appropriately. And then basically we just clamp on this, make sure we're flat against the table saw bed, which is the flattest surface I've got in the shop. And now we go make our cut. All right, now we're back at the bench. I kept the cutoff because that actually gives me sort of a good reference point as to where the grain is on the neck, where it's going to bleed into or join into the scarf joint. So this isn't going to give us an exact perfect joint, but it will give us, you know, it'll be pretty close. So I've kind of lined up the grain here so that if I do this as the long side of the scarf, this is where the grain's going to go. So I have done my center line here, and that leads me to just below this lighter streak. And so we just mark that out here, and then we run a line along here. And then when we tape this guy up, that should give us a fairly nice joint at the scarf. Not a perfect match, but pretty good. And then we're going to go do the same thing we did with the other one. Flatten it out, and then cut our scarf joint. So our two scarf joints are done. I pulled off the sister board or the MDF template for the headstock because it's got some pretty square sides now. I don't really need it to be supporting anything. This is obviously still kind of messy, so it's going to need the support. I left it on there. When we look at the back of our neck, this is how it's going to flow from neck into headstock. And for a two-piece neck where we're doing a scarf joint, that is really, really pretty nice. So now at this stage, what I would usually do is I would plane this down to about 1/2 inch and then put about 1/8 of an inch veneer on top of it. But Koa is what I make veneer to put on other things to make it look prettier. So this guy's going to stay pretty much just a full height headstock. So I will plane it down to 5/8 of an inch, but I am not going to put a veneer on it. It's going to be just like this. And so we will have a neck about like that. And here's the jig I use to clamp up my headstock. So normally I don't have this MDF here, and I use a little spacer to kind of push it off a little bit so that I can jam the headstock down in here nice and tight. And then I clamp here and here to do the gluing. So this changes a little bit. I did cut out a little bit so that I could get the headstock in there, and I've got a couple pieces of MDF in here to make sure that we can get a nice snug fit. Everything's been dry fit to make sure it still all works. And now it is time for the gluing. Got a little line here where I need to go. Oh, any schmutz out of the way. But it will be pretty much looking like this. And the headstock is sitting at about 64th over right now. That gives me some space to sand, clean up any mungies. All right, and we let that sit, and we're back. So I went ahead after pulling it out of the clamps and finished up the rough outline. Now I did a video on that when I covered the curly mango headstock just a few days ago, so I'll link that in the description. I wasn't going to do that on camera again, but our strategy turned out well. So we took a piece of uneven lumber with a big old dog leg in it and made a nice straight grain neck. Even the back where the scarf joint comes together, separated by several inches on the original piece of lumber, looks pretty good. It's not a perfect alignment, but a scarf joint never will be. And you know, our grain pretty much runs through. Super excited to see how this turns out once I get into the real neck carving. But we can do a little previs. This one is going to get a rose wood fretboard. So when we're done, it's going to look a little something like that. If this is the kind of content you like, please like, subscribe, and we'll see you at the next one.